And which one did you see first?
Oh, yeah, I went first. Remember this sign?
Oh, this thing.
Yeah.
How quickly we forget it.
Yeah. I don't think, personally, I don't think we can remind ourselves enough that we're dealing with apocalyptic literature. As a result of apocalyptic literature, he says right at the very beginning, to make known through signs and symbols. There are more references and quotes in the book of Revelation to other scriptures than there are verses in the book of Revelation. So the better we know the rest of the Bible, the better we're going to get the main message. I really do think the main message is easy to get. The deeper you go, the more challenging it gets. But insofar as we can point to another passage in the Bible, which we're going to try to do all the way through, and again tonight, I think we're on pretty solid ground. Talking to Rich before class makes me also think, remember in the temptations of Jesus, when Satan quoted scripture to Jesus to try to get himself to throw himself from the great height, then he quotes the Psalms, really twists it a little bit, misquotes. How does Jesus respond to Satan?
It also says.
Yeah, the scripture also says. And I always try to remind myself, it's not like dueling scriptures. You got your verse, I got my verse. I think the point Jesus is really making is, listen, if one passage of the Bible seems to contradict the other passage, then you've misunderstood it. So if you're just going on another passage in the Bible and says, well, that's what this has to mean, if you're interpreting that in such a way as to go against the context or some other scripture, then you're on pretty shaky ground. In fact, you're not on shaky ground, you're on wrong ground, right? The Bible is not going to contradict itself. So let's take this 2 steps. We're going to try our best to focus on what other scriptures say, but we're going to try to do that, second step, in a consistent way with the rest of the message of Scripture. Okay? It is a bit of a challenge because much of what we're going to see in the book of Revelation is quoting passages in Daniel or Ezekiel or Zechariah, and passages in Daniel, Ezekiel, and Zechariah that are the apocalyptic sections of Daniel and Ezekiel, Zechariah, which means, let's explain calculus with trigonometry, then it'll be perfectly clear to everybody, right? Okay, here we are in the 12th chapter. We've got this woman and the dragon, and we're down to verse 6. The woman fled to a place in the wilderness, to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of 1,260 days. Okay, 1,260 days. We've already seen this back in chapter 11, verse 3. If you were going to say 1,260 days in months, how many months would that be?
42.
Okay, and often that same period of time is signified as 42 months, but sometimes the same period of time is signified as 1,260 days. Why?
Good, bad.
Okay, which one's bad?
42 months.
The 42 months, we're going to be talking about the bad guys or bad activity. Well, 1,260 days, we're going to be talking about the good guys, good activity. If we want to signify the same indefinite period of time, but we don't want to focus on either bad or the good, we're not going to say 42 months, and we're not going to say 1,260 days. We're going to say
3.5 years.
3.5 years, or times half time. Okay, we haven't run into that one yet, but there's 2 other ways to designate indefinite period of time. But so far we're dealing with the bad and the good, and it kind of helps us understand. So this woman fled to this place in the wilderness. Okay, where else do we read about wilderness in the Bible?
Exodus.
40 days, 40 years.
Yeah. Well, and which, by the way, which book in the Old Testament focuses more on the wilderness experience than any other book?
Is it Deuteronomy?
Numbers. Okay, why in the world do we call it the book of Numbers? Why don't we call it the book of wilderness? Because it's the whole book is pretty much covering the wilderness. Just gets us back to, why did they name the books the way they named them in the Old Testament?
It's the first word.
First major Hebrew word became the title of the book. So why did they number the people at the beginning of the wilderness experience?
First census. What's the first census?
Yeah, they count them at the beginning because where had they just been? They just got out of Egypt. How many people made it out of Egypt? Here you go. Let's count all the people. They end the book of Numbers by counting the people. Well, what? Did they lose the records or something? Why do they have to count the people again? This makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Why would they count them again at the end of the book?
Different group of people.
Make sure the generations are dead.
Because the wilderness experience was all about all the adults dying off. We're going to start all over again. How did they survive during the wilderness experience?
Manna.
Yeah, manna, quail, water from the rock. The wilderness, by definition, is, when it's used biblically, is that place that does not sustain life. The only way you're going to survive is if God takes care of you. Okay, what's the picture here? The picture is God taking care of his people. Okay, in your mind, just back up a little bit. The dragon and the pregnant woman are in opposition to each other. It's like a fighting match, a war, battle. The dragon, we're going to see in just a few verses, is obviously Satan. How do we know that? Because it tells us it's Satan, right? The woman is pregnant and she gives birth to a child, and the pregnant woman giving birth to a child, who is that child?
Jesus.
That child would be Jesus. So the woman would represent God's people. And through the Old Testament time, Satan did everything he could do to prevent the Messiah coming, but he wasn't able to do that. Once the Messiah is born, here's the major message. He doesn't just throw up his hands and say, okay, I lost. No. Now he goes off and makes battle against the offspring of the woman, and that's where we are here. But God still protects his people as long as they stay in the wilderness. The place where God provides. The place where God protects us. I always like the image of, you stay inside the fenced backyard, you don't have any problems. But once you open up the gate and walk outside the fence, then you throw yourself open to all sorts of trouble. There is a place where God will protect you, and Satan can't get. That doesn't mean you can't go outside of that protection. Well, hopefully we'll develop this thought a little bit more as we go a little bit further. Verse 7, a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. Okay, we're actually stepping back a little bit, and this is a good reminder not to read the book of Revelation in sequential chronological order. We're just making major points. You remember with the first 7 seals? Each seal was not, here's what's going to happen in history, and then here's what happens next, and here's what happens next. No, it's a picture, here's what happens throughout history. Now here's another layer, another way you can look at what's happening throughout history. And then the third seal, here's another layer, a little bit more detail on what's happening throughout history. This is a picture of good versus evil in several aspects of it. Was Satan able to prevent Jesus coming? No, he wasn't. Did he give up fighting against God's people once Jesus came? No, still fighting against God's people. What's going on in heaven? In heaven, there's a battle taking place, and Satan loses this. Have we seen this before in the book of Revelation?
Yes.
Yeah, at least 2 times. At least 2 times. The great star falling to the earth. Okay, we've at least had that picture 2 times. Here it is again for the 3rd time. Michael, what do we know about Michael in the Bible?
An archangel.
He's the archangel. Have we ever seen Michael fighting before?
Yes.
At least 2 other times in the Bible. What are those 2 references where Michael's fighting?
Prince of Persia.
Okay, he's fighting against Prince of Persia. Why is he fighting against Prince of Persia? Actually, there was another angel fighting against Prince of Persia, and Michael comes along and helps him out, right? Why is he doing that? So that the message, which is the answer to Daniel's prayer, can be delivered. And how long did it take? Do you remember this? 21 days. 21 days the answer was delayed. And from the physical realm, the realm in which we live, it's just like Daniel's waiting forever to get his answer. 21 days. Not realizing on the spiritual realm there's great battle going on. I think there's a lot to chew on with that. But the other reference we have to Michael fighting would be against Satan in regard to what?
Moses' body.
Yeah, the body of Moses. Okay, this is a separate battle. It's taking place in heaven. He's fighting against dragon, and we're going to find out in just a minute that's Satan. And Satan and his angels, the dragon and his angels fight back. Verse 8, he was not strong enough, talking about Satan and his angels, he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. So Michael and the good guys win. Satan and the bad guys lose. What happens to them? They get kicked out of heaven. The great dragon was hurled down. That ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. This is such a great verse. One verse. And we got the 4 major names of Satan. So we know when we're talking about the dragon, we are talking about Satan. We know when we talk about the serpent, we're talking about Satan. And we know when we're talking about the devil, we're talking about Satan. And Satan, we're talking about Satan, obviously. Okay. 4 pictures. Isn't that interesting? 4, because 4 is usually a number associated with the earth. The earth often, not always, but often it's associated earth man, not spiritual men. So earth people without God. Okay, these 4 pictures, if you use the picture of the dragon, why would you use the picture of the dragon instead of calling him Satan? What are you trying to emphasize?
Power.
Yeah, if you're trying to emphasize his power, and this is very powerful, given more details, remember all the horns and the crowns and the tail and everything else that he used to sweep the stars out of. Very powerful picture. If you're picturing Satan as being very powerful, how does Satan use his power?
Destructive.
Okay, yeah, what I was looking for is Satan using his power against us. Why should his power make any difference? Because he's trying to hurt us. So when you think of Satan as the dragon, you think of persecution. You think of him overpowering, attacking, fighting against God's people, right? Okay, if you switch, which is going to happen in this chapter, right in the middle of talking about the dragon, we're going to switch, and we're going to start calling him a serpent. Okay, if we know we're talking about the same guy, already tells us that in verse 9, right? But why would you call him the serpent? What are you emphasizing now about Satan?
Well, he's lying or cunning.
Yeah, you automatically go back to the garden scene, don't you? You automatically think of craftiness. In fact, it's become proverbial, hasn't it?
Yes.
We talk about being sly like a snake. Yeah, stop that.
Sorry.
Okay, so you've got the dragon, you've got the serpent. Okay, what does the name Satan mean? Does anybody have a footnote on this? What does it mean? Isn't Satan the one that means the accuser? The accuser? Or can I say prosecution? Prosecuting attorney? In Zechariah the 3rd chapter, that's exactly the role that Satan plays. And he's referred to as Satan as the one who accuses God's people. The accuser. Okay, what is the name the devil? We call him the devil. What does the devil mean?
Slanderer.
Slanderer, one who speaks against. Okay, so Satan and the devil, very close terms, but one's more accusing, the other one's more attacking, making legal accusations versus just opposing us. Okay, so those are the 4 pictures given to us. Turn over to, keep your hand here in the book of Revelation, turn over to the Gospel of John chapter 12 for just a minute. John chapter 12. John the 12th chapter, let's start around verse 30. John chapter 12 verse 30. No, let's go back up to verse 28. Let's start in verse 28, okay? Jesus says, Father, glorify your name. A voice came from heaven and said, I have glorified it, I will glorify it again. The crowd was there, this verse 29, and heard it, said that it had thundered. And others said, an angel had spoken to him. And Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Jesus is coming up to this very last hour. This is right at the end of his ministry. And he says, now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world, who's the prince of this world?
Satan.
Satan. Prince of this world will be driven out. Be driven out of where?
Heaven.
Yeah. Verse 32. And when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death that he was going to die. Okay, when I am lifted up, I'll draw all people unto myself. What is he talking about? Being lifted up on a cross. Okay, what is he talking about? He's talking about when I die on the cross, you know what's going to happen to Satan?
He's going to fall from heaven.
He's going to fall from heaven. When is this battle taking place? Back in Revelation chapter 12. It's taking place when Jesus is on the cross. Another reference for this would be Colossians chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2, verse 12 and following, especially verse 14 and 15, where it talks about he took everything that stood opposed to us and the degrees that were against it, and he nailed them to the cross, making a public spectacle out of him who was in everything that was opposed to us, triumphing victory over evil on the cross, right? So again, the idea that Satan goes down in flames when Jesus is on the cross. The other reference is Luke chapter 10, verse 18, when the 72 come back from preaching, Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning. Okay, he's prophetically saying, man, the kingdom, it's almost here, and I can just see Satan going down. Hadn't happened yet, but Jesus says, I can see it. Why? Because the kingdom's being preached. And guess what? Final victory on the cross. Jesus dies on the cross, conquers death, Satan gets kicked out of heaven. So the time stamp on this would be John chapter 12, 31 through 32, 33, right around in there. So he's hurt. Satan, the dragon, the serpent, Satan, the devil, leads the whole world astray. He was hurled down to earth, and his angels with him. Earth would be, I thought he was a spiritual being. Yeah, spiritual being. To earth would be where we are. We are to wreak havoc on people. Verse 10, then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now have come the salvation and power and kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. Okay, again, the timestamp here is this is Satan being kicked out of heaven. At the same time, this would be Jesus on the cross, right? At the same time, Jesus establishes his kingdom and his authority, right? Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 and following, all authority in heaven and earth has been given unto me, right? Okay, the authority of his Messiah for the accuser of the brothers and sisters who accuses them before our God day and night has been hurled down. Okay, what was Satan doing before he got kicked out of heaven?
Roaming the earth, like Job.
Okay, roaming the earth. That's exactly right. That's Job chapter 1 and 2. What does this verse say he was doing?
Accusing us.
Yeah, accusing
He was
people.
standing up there next to God saying, did you see that? Did you see that sin? Did you see that sin? Did you see that sin? Did you see that guy? Did you look at Jay today? Did you see what they're doing? Did you see what they thought? And every time he does that, you know what we look like? Picture Zechariah chapter 3, because in Zechariah chapter 3, you've got the courtroom scene. God sitting on the behind the bench as the judge. There's Satan, prosecuting attorney. And there we are, represented by the high priest who represents God's people. And Satan's pointing at us. Why? What are we dressed like?
Filthy rags.
Filthy rags. All our righteousness equals filthy rags. That's the best we have to author. And Satan's just pointing. Until somebody steps forward. Who's the one who steps forward?
Jesus.
Yeah, he's called the branch. The branch. Why is he called the branch?
To represent the branch of David.
Yeah, remember, branch, probably a better translation would be shoot.
Yeah, the root.
Yeah, so you picture a big tree stump's been chopped down, and then all of a sudden the tree starts to grow again. What's the stump that's been chopped down?
The line of David.
Line of David. It's kind of like, wow. After Zedekiah, it's like, wow, we've got nobody else from the line of David, right? And then all of a sudden, boy, that bloodline, that royal line, from that line, here's Jesus. And what does Jesus come along to do? He comes along to do something that shuts up Satan. The branch comes, and it says at the end of Zechariah the 3rd chapter, he's going to do it in one day. What's he going to do in one day? In one day, he's going to give the command that all of our dirty rags be taken off, and we be dressed in this spotless outfit, these perfect robes. so we can stand before God, and it shuts Satan up. It happened on one day. Well, it's another way of picturing the exact same thing. Satan gets kicked out of heaven. What happens? The accuser, prosecuting attorney, loses his case. He can't say a word against us because of what the Messiah has done. The accuser is no longer successful. He's been hurled down. Verse 11, they triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb. Blood throughout the Bible is used to signify what? Death. When you talk about the shedding of blood, you're usually talking about somebody died. If you bleed long enough. Okay, the shedding of his blood, by the blood of the Lamb. Jesus' death is what brings an end to Satan's claim against us. It's not just by the blood of the Lamb, it's also by the word of their testimony. Jesus made a statement in Matthew 10th chapter. He says, if you confess me before men, what am I going to do?
Confess you before my Father.
Yeah, I'm going to confess you before my Father. I find this so interesting because that very passage where he says this, around verse 33, 32, 33, of Matthew 10th chapter, he says, you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my Father in heaven. Just a few verses right before that, in verse 28, he says, don't be afraid of people. All they can do is kill you. Don't be afraid of people who kill you. I'll tell you who you ought to be afraid of. Who should you be afraid of?
God,
Not just somebody who can kill your body, somebody who's determined what's going to happen to your soul. So don't be afraid of evil forces, anything Satan can throw at you. The biggest thing Satan can do to you is kill you. Well, that's okay for us, right? If we're in that right relationship with God. So those who remain faithful to the word of their testimony. I love the way it goes here, because it says, not just the word of the testimony, they did not love their lives so much as to shrink back from death. Same context. Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. We're not afraid of dying. Are we? You don't have to answer me. But can I ask you that again? We're not afraid of dying, right?
No.
Our bodies.
Good for you. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Who dwells in heaven?
Believers.
Yeah, if it depends which kind of heaven we're talking about. Which kind of heaven are we talking about here? Probably the realm of God, right? Dwelling place of God. Whose citizenship is in heaven? Ours? Ours, not just people who've already died. Our citizenship is in heaven. The reference is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 6, talking about Christians. Our citizenship is in heaven, right? So rejoice, you heavens, and those of you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. Well, he's already been defeated. He's already been cast down to earth. He already knows that he's lost, but he doesn't go away. He's going to keep fighting against God's people till the very end. Now I got to go back up, because when it talks about our citizenship is in heaven, he's probably making the distinction between those of us who are still on earth versus those of us who've already died. The one great thing about already dying is you no longer have to fight against Satan and what he's doing. There's a lot of great things about dying, by the way, but that's one of the great things. No more temptation. It's all done, right? But those of us still have to deal with the fact that Satan's going to be attacking us. Verse 13, when the dragon, who's the dragon?
Satan.
Okay, when Satan saw that he had been hurled down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child, that'd be Jesus, so we're talking about God's people here. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to a place prepared for her in the wilderness. Okay, we got the same picture again, right? Place of protection in the wilderness. The reference would be Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, almost a direct quote. It says in Exodus 19, verse 4, God's rehearsing what happened when they were slaves in the land of Egypt. He says, you know what I did? I gave you the wings of an eagle so I could take you out of that place. Took you out of captivity to save you, but they ended up in the wilderness where God provided for them, right? Okay, to a place prepared for her in the wilderness where she would be taken care of for times, and half a time out of the serpent's reach. Indefinite period of time. Okay, why wouldn't we use 1,260 days here?
This is better than good.
Say what?
It's better than good.
Okay, well, times and half time doesn't necessarily mean good.
We don't
Can go
know
either way.
exactly how long it's going to be.
We don't know exactly how long it's going to be. But 1,260 days is also an indefinite period of time.
Right.
We don't know exactly how long it's going to be. That usually signifies good people. 42 months usually signifies bad people. It's usually when you don't want to signify good or bad that you say 3.5 years or times and half time. So why would this be something not necessarily good? Because not everybody who's a Christian stays a Christian. Not everybody who goes to the wilderness stays in the wilderness. In fact, I think it's going to be a very clear message before we leave this chapter that you can be protected, but that's up to you. Anyway, let's come back to this picture here. Let me see. She is taken care of in the wilderness. Another, the other reference I wanted to make sure we got in our notes is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, where it says, "No temptation has overcome you, but such is common to man." God protects us in a lot of different ways, and one of the ways He protects us, 1 Corinthians 10:13, "No temptation has overcome you, but such is common to man." Because God will not allow you to be tempted beyond,
What you can stand.
beyond your ability to withstand. God does protect His people. But what's the next thing that verse says? He says He will not allow you to be tempted beyond your ability to withstand, but with the temptation will come,
A back door.
back door, way of escape. Way of escape. So every time there's a temptation, number one, God puts limits on it. Won't allow Satan to do something more than we can take. So anytime you say to yourself, "Oh, I just can't take it," you're lying. You're lying to yourself. God put limits on Satan, right? As far as temptation goes. So number one, He puts limits. And number two, there's always a way out. Which leads to a question, I'll just go ahead and throw this out. If, like you're going down a highway, right, and there's an exit, so there's always a way out. If you pass the exit, does that mean God has to give you another exit? Do you understand what I'm saying? If there's always a way out, what happens if you ignore the way out?
Well, you're on your own.
Free choice.
Yeah, I'm thinking you're taking advantage of the grace of God, and there's limits to these sorts of things. Yeah, I just want to throw that out because sometimes we say to ourselves, "Well, there was no way out here." Well, yeah, there was no way out because you passed up all the other ways out that God already gave you, right? Okay. Anyway, I love this picture of the wilderness, a place to be protected where Satan cannot go. But notice what he says at the end of this. She would be taken care of for times and half time out of the serpents. Oh, we switched. We've been talking about the dragon. It's all about the dragon. Oh, now it's the serpent. Does this make sense? Of course He's going to come on and attack God's people, but when God's people get out of His reach, then what's He going to do? Yes, let's try propaganda. Let's try lies. One of Satan's #1 tools, what comes out of his mouth, lies, right? Yeah.
Any ideas or insights or what you might think the place is that
Yes.
is given?
Yes. Yes. I really think that the wilderness represents the Word of God. Psalm 119, verse 11, "Your word have I hidden in my heart that I might not sin against God." You know where we know we are safe? In fact, the only thing that we know with 100% confidence is what God tells us. I think the place of safety, the wilderness, is the Word of God. We'll get into that a little bit more. I'm glad you brought that up. I should have mentioned that a little bit earlier before we went any further with this picture of the wilderness. But okay. Anyway, out of the serpent's reach. So the serpent's going to try to deceive. We're at a place where we have God's truth, right? Verse 15, "Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent." That's why I've got these pictures up top. We've got two pictures of out of the mouth of, except it's a dragon instead of a serpent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, they goofed up. The dragon turns into a serpent, and out of the serpent's mouth comes a river. And when Satan speaks, according to John chapter 8, he speaks his native language, which is
Lies.
Yeah, he's father of lies. Right? So he's the deceiver, the great deceiver. The only way Satan can get us away from God's truth is by telling us lies. Telling us lies. This is going to be so interesting to me because there's going to be two major beasts that Satan's going to use. One's going to represent political powers. I think it's going to be pretty obvious at the beginning of the 13th chapter. And then, that's the beast of the sea. Then the beast of the earth is going to, later on, be identified as the false prophet. Somebody who can pretend to speak on behalf of God, but twist God's truth. You know, some of Satan's most effective work happens in the category of religion. Sadly so. But we ought to be forewarned about this. It's one of the purposes of the book. So he spewed out of his mouth a river to overtake the woman, sweep her out of the torrent. But the earth helped, this is verse 16, the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Okay, so we're back to the dragon again. So I guess it is okay, the picture up here. It's a serpent, but we're going back and forth because maybe it's both attack and deception. Probably being pictured here. Numbers chapter 16, verse 32 is a picture in the Old Testament where the earth opens up its mouth and swallows up a bunch of people. Do you remember that story? Who are these people that are being swallowed up?
People at the foot.
The ones who did what?
They were opposing Moses.
Yeah, yeah. There were two groups of people there. This is Korah's rebellion, and a bunch of people said, why does Moses get to be our leader? And why is it Aaron and his descendants? Why does Aaron get to be the high priest? And why is it the Levites? Aren't we just as good? Right? And that's where Moses said, everybody associated with them, get away. Get away from him. And you know what? If nothing happens to him, if he dies of old age and stuff, maybe he's right. But I don't know if something strange like, you know, the earth opens up, swallows him up today. Maybe that's a definite, no, maybe nothing. That's a sign that they weren't right with God. As soon as he finishes praying that prayer, ooh, the earth opens up. Okay, it's a great picture in the Old Testament of vindication, right? It's a great sign of judgment as well. But it's also a picture of sometimes God using the earth. What's that word that we have sometimes when we talk about God working through the natural order of things to protect his people, to help his people? It's called what?
Nature?
Providence.
Providence.
Providence. Do our prayers make a difference?
Yes.
Yeah.
Prayers, what I mean by that, will our prayers change things that happen?
Sometimes.
I think so. In fact, I think this Sunday we're really going to focus on a passage that really hits that hard. And nature itself can be changed. God working through the natural order of things, and that's one of the ways that God works to protect his people. So the earth opens up its mouth, swallows up the river that the dragon spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon, verse 17, was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's command and hold fast the testimony of Jesus. I would like to suggest this verse implies, why is he making war against her offspring? It'd be us, right?
Yes, because we believe.
But why is he making war against her if it's impossible for any of us to fall?
It is possible.
It is possible for some of us to fall. Does Satan ever take anyone captive?
Yeah.
Yes, he does. He's making war against God's people. He makes war against everybody, but he's making war against God's people because it's possible for some of us to lose our position. All the way through the book of Revelation, it talks about those who hold true to the testimony, those who remain faithful. It's set against the backdrop of the possibility that you may not. That's why we're being encouraged not to give up, because it's possible for you to. Chapter 13, verse 1, the dragon, we already know this is Satan, because in verse 9, the previous chapter, right? The dragon stood on the shore of the sea. I love this picture. It's good. Last picture was the boxing match between the pregnant woman and the dragon. Pregnant woman wins. Man, what a great video that would make, right? This one, the great dragon goes out to the ocean, and he's going to call up, you know, picture some demonic picture here with all the Hollywood scene, whatever. But he's going to call up this huge beast out of the sea. But notice this description he's going to give us. He says, he stood on the shore of the sea, and I said, by the way, what did the ancients think of the sea?
Probably black and mysterious. mysterious, evil.
Evil, scary. In fact, on some of the oldest maps we've got, you know what they drew at the edges of the ocean?
Dragon.
Yeah, here are the monsters.
Yeah.
Right? Don't go too far. The monsters will get you. Right? Because of the ancients' great fear of the sea, many times they would sail as close to the land as they could. You know where the worst place possible is to sail? And so when you hit the reefs and a lot of boats go down, it just made them more afraid of the sea. Stuff like that. So it's one of these things. So it's a picture that would, in the ancients' mind, this would be like scary. Somebody turned out the lights, you know, that kind of thing. So we got this picture. He stood on the seashore, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. We've seen this picture before, haven't we? What do horns represent throughout the Bible? Power. Power. When used symbolically, it represents power. The animals with horns are the ones you are afraid of, right? So it represents power. They 7 heads. Again, we've seen this picture before. 7 is a number that usually means complete or perfect. So 7 heads, that's the part of your body where you think. It represents great wisdom. In fact, he wants to picture himself as having perfect wisdom. So he'd use the number 7 with 10 crowns on his head. Again, most of the time in the book of Revelation, these crowns are victor's crowns. Not here. Last time we were talking about Satan being pictured, he had on royal crowns. Here it is again. So we've got on royal crowns. That'll be a clue to us. These are kings, people who rule, right? They've got on royal crowns on its horns, and on each head was blasphemy, a name of blasphemy. The word blasphemy literally means to speak against. Okay? What was considered one of the worst things you could say against God by the Jewish people? Well, in John the 10th chapter, the charge brought against Jesus very publicly was, that's blasphemy because he claims to be God. To make yourself out to be God was one of the most slanderous things you could possibly say. Okay, so they have names. What do names represent throughout the Bible? Your character. Your character. The very character is so self-arrogant, self-focused, making itself to be God, that it's blasphemous. The beast I saw resembles, notice this picture in verse 2. Here's the beast that he's calling up out of the sea. He's got all these horns, right? He's got the crowns and blasphemy, and we're going to see in a little bit because he sets himself up to be God, to rule as God, right? And I saw the beast resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and the mouth like that of a lion. Now, before we finish the second verse here, those 3 creatures so far, there's going to be a 4th creature. So we've got, oh, that picture kind of got cut off, didn't it? We got this 4th really wild beast. But the first 3 are going to be the leopard, the bear, and the lion. Reverse order of exactly the way the 3 animals presented in the book of Daniel, chapter, I think it's chapter 7? Is it 7? Okay, Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, you've got the lion first, then the bear, and then you've got the leopard. The bear, remember the bear is lopsided? Do you remember this picture in the book of Daniel? It's been a while since we've gone through Daniel, right? Those 3, he doesn't just present them in Daniel's 7th chapter. He starts going into great detail. He's going to tell what each one of these animals does. In fact, when the book of Daniel was handed to Alexander the Great, he was so frightened because he's like, this pictures me. Which one of those animals pictured Alexander the Great? Be the leopard. The lopsided bear gives you the idea that one side's stronger than the other. Which great kingdom came before the Greeks ruled the world? Who ruled the world?
Persia.
But it's a combination of the Persians and the Medo-Persian. Which part was stronger? The Persian was much stronger than the alliance between the Medes and the Persians. So it was very lopsided. But who came before the Medo-Persian Empire? The lion of the Babylonian Empire, right? Okay, that's all pictured out. So he's putting them in reverse order here, but immediately God's people are going to say, I remember this, in the book of Daniel, we're talking about great kingdoms of the world. So they got these crowns on. We're talking about government, political powers that have not just come upon the scene. We're talking about political powers who've been opposed to God's people, which many of them have, right? Okay, let's continue with the picture here. He says, I saw them, and the dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. Okay, let's go again back to the book of Daniel. Do you remember we were talking about Michael fighting? When Michael fought, who did he fight against? Well, he came and helped another angel fight against who?
Prince of Persia.
The Prince of Persian Empire. Behind the Persian Empire, there was demonic, angelic forces helping the Persian Empire do what Satan wanted them to do. And Michael and his angels fought against the evil angels who were identified as angels associated with Persia. So we already have pictures of demonic forces behind some of the world empires. Interesting thought that maybe the reason some dictators have been able to kill millions of people and rise to power is because they had satanic help to do some of that stuff. I don't want to push this too far, but I don't want to ignore it either. Satan often works through political forces. Big surprise, right? Okay, verse 3, one of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed, and the whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. Okay, if we're talking about the spiritual realm, satanic forces, when was Satan kicked out of heaven? At the cross.
Yep.
So in a real sense, when was Satan defeated? At the cross. Does Satan still do damage?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Well, I thought he got kicked out. Yeah, he got kicked out of heaven. I thought he was, what was it? Genesis chapter 3:15. The prophecy is Satan's going to strike the heel, but what's
Step on his head.
He's going to crush his head. When did he crush his head? Cross. Wasn't he dead and gone? Well, no.
See?
Yeah, he's dead and gone. Death blow's been delivered, but it's like he's come back to life to still do damage. Did the church have a fantastic start and overtake the whole known world when it first began? Yeah, it did. It sure did. Colossians chapter 1, Acts chapter 17, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. Message is rung out throughout the whole world. This message has made it to every creature. First century, fantastic growth. But did opposing political forces come back again and start persecuting? Yeah. Looked like we had a great victory. We're doing great things. Remember the picture of the two witnesses? Man, boy, these guys are powerful. And then what happens? The forces of the world throw a great party because they're out to kill us. So political forces, it may seem like, we have a victory for the good, but until God calls an end to this, evil forces are going to rebound. And that's part of, I think, what's being pictured here. Verse 4, people worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? Okay, I want us to bring this together. Obviously, there's a picture of worship here, and not only is there a picture of worship, picture of arrogance. It's kind of like, we're worshiping this beast. Why? Because, boy, nobody can beat the beast, right? Go back up a few verses. What does this beast represent? Political powers. Political powers. So world powers throughout the history, there may have been some specific ones, but throughout history this has happened many times, right? There have been a lot of political powers. In what sense do people worship political power?
do whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
Hail Hitler.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me read this verse again, towards the end of this verse, when he says, they also worship the beast and ask, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? The picture that comes to my mind is when Christians or people who try to do the right thing are ridiculed by saying, why are you fighting this? You'll never win. Good guys never come out on top, right? And the ultimate thing, worship, maybe the picture would be better, instead of us worshiping political power, if we would just say worship of power. Whoever has the most money, the most influence, the most power, most toys, whatever you want to say. That's kind of what, that guy's richer, that guy's more influential, that guy's more powerful. That's a sense in what we worship. Well, those who have the most influence and the most power, those are the guys who rule. In a sense, we're talking about the same thing. Political rule, ruling people. And anybody who wants to stand up for morality or a standard of truth against power, it's kind of like, what are you, an idiot? Why are you telling the truth now? That's not gonna benefit anybody. So our world says, and that's the kind of world that we live in. I think that's exactly what's being pictured here. Verse 5, the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. Limited period of time. We're talking about bad people doing their work, right? Got the 42 months. And again, the blasphemy here, probably the John 10:33, equating themselves to be God, ultimate power, right? You can't stand against it. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. I just find it interesting, the four things mentioned here. Because again, this is what's taking place on earth. And what's he doing? Speaking against God, slandering his name. What's the difference between speaking against God and his name? There's a sense in which there's no difference, but he's parsing it out. They're not just against God, they're against the character of God, godliness, right? Name represents character. His dwelling place and those who live in heaven. Again, what's the difference between his dwelling place and those who live in heaven? Well, it's the same thing, but we're parsing it out just to emphasize. There's going to be a lot of attack, emphasis by enumeration. Verse 7, he was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every, let's count them, tribe, people, language, and nation. Again, we're picturing what happens here on earth and the beast's great power. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life. Okay, I want to stop there for just a second because I think there's a great truth being taught here. Who worships the beast? He's going to tell us here. Everybody who doesn't worship the Lamb. Romans chapter 7 makes a point. It says, you get to choose who your master is, but guess what? You don't get to choose whether or not you're a slave. Everybody's a slave. Part of Satan's game plan is to be a serpent and make people think that you're serving yourself. But when you serve yourself, you're really serving him. So if you don't belong to the Lamb, you do belong to the serpent. And he's happy for you to be ignorant of that. So everybody who doesn't worship the Lamb is worshiping the serpent, Satan. Even if you're just trying to look out for number one. That's an allegiance that belongs to God alone, and you've played into Satan's hand. The Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Okay, this sounds like the letters to the 7 churches, doesn't it? Yeah. Why did Jesus keep saying that? Because this is so important. It's as though he's saying, pay attention. Really get this. What is it he's going to say? If anyone, by the way, this is a quote from Jeremiah chapter 15. Been going over Jeremiah on Monday nights. It says, anyone who is going to captivity, into captivity they will go. Anyone who is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. Who's this talking about? It's a warning given to God's people. We face death all day long. Do we face death, the threat of death? Yeah. Is God warning us? Yeah. He's saying it'll be worth it. We win. But guess what? It's not going to be easy. This calls for what? Patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. I think he's still talking about God's people. When then I saw the second beast coming out of the earth. The first one he calls up out of the sea, right? Political forces. This beast over in chapter 19 is going to be called the false prophet. So we already know that. So we know we're talking about religious influence that Satan can use. Has Satan ever done nasty things in the name of religion?
Sure has.
Yeah. By the way, don't just think of TV evangelists. Sorry, that's one of the first things that always come to mind. Don't just think of in false name of Christian religion. Are there other religions on the planet other than Christianity?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Has Islam done any harm to humanity through the years?
Yeah.
Okay, that one, I probably ought to stop here, and we'll talk about this more next week. That one, to us, maybe because of 9/11 and some other things, we know it a little bit better. But has Buddhism ever done harm to humanity? Unfortunately, a lot of media-level information in the United States thinks of Buddhism as transcendental meditation and just a good, attitude and philosophy of life and everything. If you want to understand, sorry to get on a high horse here, but if you want to get a good graphic picture of Buddhism, go to a place where Buddhism rules. Go to Southeast Asia and places like that. You know what Buddhism has done to people? Have you seen the damage that the philosophy of Buddhism has enslaved generations of people. It is, when you talk of, I shouldn't start scratching the surface here unless I can give you some examples. So let me give you one. Let me give you one example that's tied directly to the philosophy of Buddhism. There's a ministry called Rafa House. And as I understand this, there's people here who know Rafa House a whole lot better than I do. But Rafa House is focused on rescuing people stuck in human trafficking, especially in the sex trade. We got to meet a group of people from the, what's it called, Boko? Yeah. A few years ago, a bunch of these young ladies who were taken as sex slaves were set free. One thing that the missionaries impressed upon us was it was so hard to rescue some of these girls caught in sex trade, because if you're an American like me, you think, okay, we're breaking in, guns a-blazing, here we go, we got you, we rescued you. Well, here's what the missionaries found out. You can take somebody out of the prostitution ring and they'll go right back. Yeah. Why in the world would somebody go right back to slavery? Because I deserve this. What makes you think you deserve this? Buddhism does. It makes you think that this is my fate and this is what the universe has planned for me. This is the kind of person I am, this kind of family I come from. I deserve this and I need to just learn to live this way. So it directly is supported by false religious beliefs. It's horrific. And I've gone over time, but can I just throw out a warning? In the West, we flippantly talk about karma. And we mean, what goes around comes around, you reap what you sow and stuff like that. Much of the world doesn't mean that at all. Much of the world with karma means you don't deserve anything good in your life. Bad things will happen to you because you're a bad person and you deserve bad things to happen to you. It's a sad, sad thing. We'll maybe get into a little bit more of this. I'm sorry I went so long. Any questions, comments over this?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yes.
In my Bible, there was in chapter 12.
Yes.
They made a note about there was verse 18, but it didn't give the verse. But in some manuscripts, there's a verse 18.
Yes.
What would it be?
I will look that up for you next week, okay?
Okay.
I had forgotten about that, and I did not put that in my notes, so I can't tell you what it is. Does anybody have it?
Yeah.
Yes.
He stood on the sand of the sea.
Okay. Okay. Does the footnote say, is it the Masoretic, I mean, not the Masoretic, is it the Texas Receptus, TR?
No,
Okay. I'll try to make a note to look that up. But yeah, it just means that some manuscripts have an extra note there, but it's not of consequence. Yeah. Good. Good. Let's pray.